Wabakimi is an Ontario provincial park located to the north of Thunder Bay, just to the northwest of Lake Nipigon. This massive park is 5 times bigger than Quetico Provincial Park to the southwest. Despite its size, Wabakimi only sees 700 visitors per year, which is much less than Quetico and a mere fraction of the Boundary Waters Canoe Area wilderness. In our trip to Wabakimi, in a week's time, we saw 3 groups totaling 14 paddlers. Oddly, 2 of those encounter groups were on the same portage. From our departure point in Superior, Wisconsin, the drive to Wabakimi was a simple trek up State Highway 61, across the border at the Pigeon River, with the only turn up Highway 527 on the outskirts of Thunder Bay. Ontario has certainly done a great job of building and maintaining this road. Highway 527 is a lovely road, lightly traveled and smooth as butter, dead-ending at Armstrong Station, which is on the eastern border of the park. Wabakimi is a true wilderness area, comprised of numerous lakes, some of them very large, interconnected by a series of river systems. The majority of the park is in the Arctic watershed, with the water flowing north and east to Hudson Bay. The extreme southern portion of the park is in the Lake Superior watershed, which flows south and east through the famous Kapka River into Lake Nipigon, where it continues a journey down the hill into Lake Superior. Unlike the Boundary Waters in Quetico, Wabakimi is more of a multi-use park, where access by float plane to the interior of the park is often used and pretty much necessary due to the remoteness of those areas in a park this size. Several flying camps are also active and maintained in the park. Our voyagers for this trip are John on the left and Mark on the right. We have been making annual 7-day trips to Quetico for many years now and have learned a lot about the park and its excellent fishing spots. When the northern border opened in early August, we quickly procured a Quetico permit, only to have it canceled days later due to fire risk. We made a quick pivot and made alternative arrangements to visit Wabakimi. Wabakimi Canoe Outfitters and Echo Lodge is located on Mattis Lake, just off Highway 527. It is run by Bruce and Margaret Heyer. Recognized for his decades-long effort to establish this park, many call Bruce the father of Wabakimi. I wish I could have spent more time talking with Bruce about the park and his other adventures. Scratching the surface in our few hours of conversation just whet my appetite to learn more. We packed light and tight for this trip, planning to traverse the portages in one trip, which saves a lot of back and forth. The drawback to this approach is you buy lightweight gear and make some hard compromises with the gear you take on the trip. After a brief route planning session with Bruce, we opted to fly into the park in a de Havilland Beaver float plane. This was a first for me and John. In this scenario, the canoe is strapped to the float of the Beaver, and we are flown 25 miles into the park interior. Eve, our bush pilot, grew up in the business and has more than 500 hours of flight time. Eve strapped down the canoe, loaded the gear into the back of the Beaver, and after a final check, we were soon on our way. There isn't much space in the back of the Beaver for cargo, but that's okay as we are traveling pretty light on this trip. We strapped ourselves in, put on our earmuffs, and prepared for takeoff. Even with 3 passengers and a lot of gear, we were airborne within seconds, as the Beaver is a very powerful airplane. The view from the air was one of endless lakes. Eve positioned the Beaver for a smooth descent onto Lake Schwanabis. taxi to the nearby dock.
Plus, like, my compass doesn't work. That's enough to kill you. So it'll work, but every now and then just tumbles. So it's like, the guy that helicopters Kobe Bryant went down. That guy, he lost.
After quickly unloading our gear, Eve was on his way. After the float plane took off, we felt like we were truly in the middle of nowhere, but not left for dead. Bruce was kind enough to let us stay in one of his remote cabins on Schwannabus Lake the first night. Bruce built this cabin years ago to cater to the fly-in business. The cabin was beautifully designed and constructed, but unused since the onset of COVID. Clean dishes patiently sat in the sink, undisturbed since their washing 2 years prior. It was interesting exploring the grounds. Bruce lived in this tiny cabin while he was building the bigger cabin. That's a nice trout, John. The next morning, we found a productive lake trout hole, and John caught his first lake trout ever.
Let's throw him back. Good job.
We picked up a few walleyes on a reef on our way back to the cabin. We confirmed our suspicions that the fish would be found in deeper water this time of year. We headed back to the cabin and had a nice shore lunch of walleye. We packed up our gear and headed to the first portage, which navigates the Canadian National Railroad. We found the first of many boats and canoes stashed at the portage. We were perplexed at first, but later learned the First Nation communities have established what amounts to commute routes within the park, where the aluminum boats are stashed on either side of a portage, and people are able to travel between lakes by simply carrying their gear and a small outboard along over the portages. Slow and labor-intensive, but probably still faster than an average commute in Los Angeles. We knew the railroad was busy as we could hear the trains all day and night from the cabin, but we didn't expect to get so close to a train. I narrowly missed getting kissed by a train as I traversed the tracks, loaded with a canoe and pack. Bad timing as the train emerged from a rock cut as it rounded a corner. It blocked the noise until the last minute, giving only seconds of warning. John and I joked the remainder of the trip. Sarah, I have some good news and bad news. The bad news? Mark is dead. The good news is we found most of his body parts. We passed the first of 3 camps we would paddle by during the trip. Our shuttle driver, Vince, later explained the complex history of these cabins and camps that still exist throughout the park. Through land use rules, the camps were allowed to exist, unlike in the BWCAW and Quetico, where they were either burned or dismantled and removed. Many are in a state of extreme disrepair. We took a wrong turn on our third lake and decided to bushwhack a short distance into an adjacent bay rather than wade back upstream a river system. John is surveying some moose tracks at the makeshift portage. Our campsite that night was almost virgin, with undisturbed, fluffy lichens and moss on the tent pads. That was a first for me. The next day brought a 10-hour downpour, where we received 2 inches of rain and 30-mile-an-hour winds. The Nemo bug-out earned its pay that day, keeping us dry. The rain was welcome as the lakes and rivers are down 2 to 3 feet due to the summer drought.
So we're stuck here. We're not exactly sure where we are. We're somewhere in middle of Ontario on this little river by, where's the Walleye Kitchen? Camped on this little campsite in Ontario. It's been raining for about 6-7 hours. I bet it's rained an inch. 31-mile-an-hour winds. Hanging out in the bug out, talking smart, trying to stay dry. Camping's fun, isn't it, John? Yeah.
We got a bunch of 16 to 18-inch walleyes at the base of the waterfalls on the upstream and downstream sides of the campsite. We had to work for our fish on this trip, but always had more than enough for a shore lunch. There's a lot of sand and gravel in Wabakimi, making most of the portages short and flat.
This is a good portage, but as you can see, they're a little bit overgrown compared to what we're used to in the boundary waters or Quetico. Fortunately, somebody was nice enough to clear out the deadfalls with a chainsaw.
Mornings were cool and often foggy as the cool autumn air wrestles with the summer heat still trapped in the water. The outcome of this battle is a foregone conclusion, as winter is never far from the land in these northern stretches. The beauty of the Wabakimi landscape is stunning. Undisturbed patches of moss and lichens dominate the forest floor, which is strangely void of the underbrush characteristic of Quetico. If not for the accumulation of deadfalls, it would be easy to walk straight through the forest in many areas. At our campsite on Smooth Rock Lake, we found an expertly crafted fishing pole complete with eyelets and pegs for the line. Pretty impressive.
Looks like fishing line, maybe, or string. Little wood peg handle.
Yeah, there's some craftsmanship there.
Yeah, so get a
Cool.
little older, I'm going to sit out in the woods and make these.
We're going to leave it at the campsite. We don't want to burn that.
No.
Good campsites are few, but always available and well marked on Bruce's maps. Our last campsite offered a stunning view of Tamarack Lake. We opted to be picked up and trucked out on a primitive forest road. It took 90 minutes to traverse a relatively short distance due to the severity of the road. Next time, we will opt to fly out of the park. We had hoped to see a moose or woodland caribou on this trip, but it wasn't to be this time. We saw lots of loons and eagles and these brave grouse on the way out.
Hey.